This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
Ford Blue Cruise hands-free highway driving takes the work out of being behind the wheel, allowing you to relax and reconnect, while also staying in control. Enjoy the drive in Blue Cruise-enabled vehicles like the F-150, Explorer, and Mustang Mach-E. Available feature on equipped vehicles. Terms apply. Does not replace safe driving. See Ford.com/Blue Cruise for more details.
In hour number 2, ladies and gentlemen, no stranger to this microphone, we reintroduce Rod Pyle. He's an American author, journalist, public speaker, and former television producer and educator who concentrates on subjects regarding spaceflight. Pyle is editor-in-chief of Ad Astra magazine, a print and digitally quarterly published by the National Space Society, and he is the author of many great books. Good morning, Rod, or good evening to you in California. How are you this morning or this evening?
Good morning, Dr. Sky. I'm very good and glad to be back.
Well, good to have you. I guess my fault. I didn't tell properly the information to our illustrious, friends back in the control room, as we call it, the navigators. So there you go. So anyway, let's begin. Of course, both of us have so much to talk about, but more important than that, what could be more important? Ladies and gentlemen, your participation in this radio show. So here's an opportunity to listen to and to ask questions of somebody who knows a heck of a lot about the space world. And we'll also incorporate, as we always do, Rod, a little bit of a sky report that many people say, hey, where's the sky report? I want to see what I can see. So let's begin with you. Let take us out into the stars itself, above the Earth here, in Earth orbit or such, and talk about some of the important subjects that you have to bring to us today in the news world.
Well, we have, we hope, a launch test number 10 of SpaceX's Starship tomorrow, and fingers are crossed that it'll work this time. They've achieved something on each test flight, but for most of them, something also went wrong. So for this one, and this is, of course, the enormous rocket that launches out of Boca Chica. This is Elon Musk's big dream. And this is also the rocket where normally the booster is caught by the arms on the launch pad called Mechazilla. They won't do that this time because they're trying some kind of risky maneuvers with that first stage coming back to see if they can slow it down with less fuel. So they're just going to dump it in the ocean.
Wow.
And then they have a bunch of other tests. And, there's a lot of detail. But I think some of the most interesting stuff is they've changed some. They put all the heat shielding tiles across the bottom of it, which is, of course, what keeps it from heating up and melting when it re-enters. This is the top stage. And they removed selectively a bunch of them to make sure that the thing could survive with, say, it was launching a crew and returning, make sure it could survive with some of the tiles missing. So I think that was very intelligent. And they also have one more very interesting thing. One of the tile areas is what they call active cooling. They're actually running something through there. I'm not sure if it's liquid or gas on this one, to actively cool that tile like a radiator on a car.
Oh, cool.
So if that works, for the hottest areas, do that in the future. But the rest of them are just like the space shuttle tiles. They're passive, and they collect and radiate heat back and keep it from melting. So fingers crossed. And another news on that front, they've made great progress on building what they're calling a Starship Gigafactory down in Texas, which is going to be able to build these things. And
Tell us.
And they already... Well, they've been working for years in this big tent structure, and they also have a rigid one, but building these things, by the tens. They're not just doing them one at a time like you would a Saturn V or a shuttle. They build them in clusters. This will allow them to ramp up to, they hope, a couple hundred a year. And they're doing similar things out at Kennedy Space Center, although at this point, I think that's really more of a preparatory building, but they're building their launch pad there.
Right.
So, they're moving ahead. Those of us sitting on the sidelines who are comfortable armchair critics feel like it's going a little slower than we'd like because we are in this foot race with China back to the moon, we think. But if all works well, this is also the spaceship that would land the first American astronauts on the moon in 2 years.
Wow, this is interesting. Rod Pyle, of course, the author of so many space books. You can talk with him about your concerns, anything, of course, that we talk about here. We love dialogue, 1-800-848-9222. And let me collaborate a little bit more about what you're saying here. I'm looking at my desk here, and I have a model of the Saturn V. Wow, the moon rocket. 7.5 million pounds of thrust, as you know. But describe this in better detail. This rocket with 33 Raptor engines punches out, about 16 million pounds of thrust? This is what? Do the simple math. This is incredible. It's more than twice the effective power to lift than the Saturn V. I'm amazed. Talk about that.
So it's interesting. It's twice the horsepower, to paraphrase, leaving the ground, but not quite twice the lifting capacity because, of course, we want to be able to reuse it, so it's got to save some fuel to come back. But it does have a tremendous heavy lift capability. And the only downside of this system, and it's, for better or worse, and there's a little bit of both, it's kind of designed as a one-size-fits-all space launcher. Once it reaches orbit, the one that's bound for the moon, it can take somewhere, where they're not sure how many yet, between 16 and 24 refueling flights to get it tanked up to continue onto the moon. Amazing. So that's the big bugaboo that we see, the kind of coordination and choreography you'd have to have on the ground to launch fast enough to keep topping off this big thing filled with cryogenic fuel that's boiling off is going to have to be something nearly miraculous.
Very interesting. And let's talk about the Elon experience even more into what I consider to be the Mars mission. Apparently, and I'm reading this. And I'd love you to talk about this. We're talking about him looking at utilizing his own creative robots, the AI generation robots, to be the first explorers to Mars before, if I have it right, humans traveling even on a one-way mission. Those robots must be really advanced. Tell us about that.
Well, and if he stays on the schedule which he has put out, which he rarely does, we would actually have the Optimus robot or robots. It isn't clear whether he's sending 1 or 2 or 3 on this first flight to Mars. He says by late 2026, which is the next window that opens up, because as you know better than I, being an astronomer, we're only able to launch to Mars every 2 years.
Right.
I don't see it. There's just too many hurdles left for Starship to overcome to make that feasible. And I don't know that the full range of capability that Optimus has really been shown yet. I'm sure they're testing it. I haven't personally seen it. Right. But, if you're going to send something up to Mars, a bipedal robot, as good as they're getting now, and you've seen the same videos I have. I saw one the other day from Boston Dynamics of one of their walking robots running and jumping over the wreckage of a house over all this rough terrain and
it's so, Terminator-like. It's almost looking like the Terminator in the movie. It's incredible without the ugly face of the Terminator robots. Right? That's amazing.
And no guns. Yeah, but the cool thing is, our rovers up on Mars, NASA's rovers, do really great work. But any competent geologist will tell you that they could do in about an hour what it takes that thing months to do. So presumably Optimus, being bipedal with 2 arms and, being able to roughly duplicate human movement, would be able to fall somewhere in the middle there. So some great things could happen. But this is all a big experiment, and I suspect we're probably looking at 2028 at the earliest.
Very interesting. 1-800-848-9222. If you've had concerns, questions, or opinions about what's happening out there, this is the time, ladies and gentlemen, to jump in on the hotline in the form of dialogue, talking with Rod Pyle, an author who's written, how many books now do you have out there right now, Rod? This is amazing.
I'm working on number 21.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. And what will be? Can you give us a little bit of a prelude information on that? A little bit of tidbit on what that book is about.
It's a history of the Apollo program. I've done a couple of those already, but this one is being told through the eyes of one of the flight directors, about whom nobody ever wrote a biography. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a slightly different take, and I'll be able to talk more about it in a couple of months because authors. I mean, we're always turning in the manuscripts late, so I'm still working on it.
Well, when I come and write my first book, I'm going to knock on your door, and hopefully the door will open, because that would be an experience of a lifetime, and I certainly have some ideas that we could talk about off air if you're so inclined to permit me to do that. That would be nice.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Let's talk a little bit more.
I, too, can tell you how to go from a six-figure income to a five-figure income as an author in no time flat.
Wow. That's a positive way to start and continue a radio show. But, Rod, this is interesting. Let's talk a little bit more on the political side of the world when it comes to space. This is amazing, and you gave us a lot of information in the different iterations that we've had you as a guest with what the president has decided on nullifying a nominee, and that was Jared Isaacson, to be the head of NASA for whatever reason. You could tell us what you think the reason was and what's actually going on in the realm or the area of the administrator or future administrator of NASA right now. Talk about it.
Well, and these are my opinions only, not those of the National Space Society or the magazine. This is just Rod talking. So this is Sean Duffy, who's the interim administrator. As far as any of us can tell, word on the circuit is that Jared Isaacman was ejected because Elon Musk had fallen out of favor, and that there was one guy in particular, his name escapes me at the moment, that had Trump's ear and said, this guy can't be any good if he's a friend of Elon Musk's. So for whatever reason, and, he was about to be going to his final confirmation. So this was like days before that. And I think I told you last time I was sitting talking to see some of these old Apollo guys, astronauts and so forth, when I got a ping on my phone from one of my writers saying, "Hey, did you hear that Isaacman's out?" And I was like, "What?" And I told them, and they just, all of them put their head in their hands and just shook their heads. And the sentiment was, they felt like something beautiful that they had created half a century ago was slowly being unraveled. So we don't really know, the party line on it was, well, he contributed to Democrats, but that's something they had known. He had told them almost a year earlier. So that's probably not it. We'll probably never know. So right now we have Sean Duffy in there, who's also in charge of the Department of Transportation, which has its own issues. That's enough job for one guy, but he's now doing two jobs, which is also running NASA. And as we know, the White House has said they want to cut the NASA budget, primarily cutting science by 50%. So that was enough of a shock to the system. But then recently, Duffy came out and said, oh, by the way, we're going to stop looking back at Earth. NASA should just be looking out in space. So to put him in his words, all the climate science and the other priorities the last administration had at NASA, we're going to move aside. Now, there's a complication here, although it's not spelled out in these exact words. The NASA charter from 1958 says atmospheric science, which implies Earth, climate change, all that. And, there's a sense that if we don't get the data, then climate change ceases to exist, which we know isn't the case. So it's a little puzzling, a little concerning. If they were going to move that money over to NOAA or some other agency, I could understand it, but this is just a cut with no reallocation. So it's deeply concerning to a lot of people. So a number of missions are on the chopping block, including the Orbiting Carbon Observatory, Deep Space Climate Observatory, another one that looks at plankton and aerosols as they interact with the ocean, which we know is heating and could cause all kinds of drama on its own.
Well, let me propose a question to the audience, Rod Pyle. This is interesting. I want to ask the audience out there, far and wide around the nation and the world, how important is the U.S. space program to you, ladies and gentlemen? And maybe we'll get some shocking responses back, but we may also get some very positive ones, because look at the great history. I still have friends. I don't know about you, and I call them sometimes less than friends, but I still respect them. They say, we never went to the moon, and that story goes on and on. But, ladies and gentlemen, your contribution to this radio show at 1-800-848-9222, we posed that particular question. How important is America in space and the whole space program itself, whether it be privatized like Elon Musk or focusing on NASA? Look at all the great strides, Rod, that NASA has made over the years, and it's very obvious, even to a sixth grader, that it seems like we've lost a lot of steam in that engine, regardless, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And there are other concerns. As I think we discussed before, the ROI from NASA activity is huge. It's estimated for Apollo, we got between $16 and $24 back on every dollar that went into that program. And that program was a lot more expensive than the one we're doing this time. This is about a quarter or less than what was spent on that. But also, when we won the space race back in the 1960s, there was this huge geopolitical soft power swing of non-aligned countries saying, hey, the U.S. is where it's at. They've got education, they've got engineering technology. see you later, Russia, and off to us they came. And the concern is that, since in the first Trump administration, the gauntlet was thrown down, we're going to get back to the moon first, with, obviously aimed at China, because Russia's out of the game at this point, pretty much.
Yes.
That we have a new geopolitical swing to be concerned about, and it's happening.
Yes. Amazing. It's just an amazing story out there. But talk to us about this. This is fascinating to me. You have, of course, you are the editor-in-chief of Ad Astra. That means To the Stars, as people may not know or may know. National Space Society. Talk about this, because if I'm correct, a good friend of ours, and mine particularly, was Mr. Hugh Downs, the great broadcaster of renown of television and, of course, of so much of radio and TV. But describe the organization to us and how long it's been around. I think it's an important part of American space history.
So the National Space Society was founded back in about 82, I think. There was a merger between two existing organizations, the National Space Institute and the L5 Society. National Space Institute had been founded by Werner von Braun and some other folks out of NASA as kind of a NASA support group, and the L5 Society was looking at the work of people that were interested in doing orbital colonies. So these two organizations merged. The NSI picked up a chapter structure from the L5 Society, excuse me, and they've been moving on ever since. And they've been publishing Ad Astra since, I think, the late 80s. It's been through a number of iterations. I came in 2017. Yeah. And really, it's the largest pro-space group for the normal citizen. Anybody can join it. We have plenty of people in from NASA and other from major space companies and concerns. But really, it's made for everyone, and that's why I joined back in the 80s, because I thought, back then I couldn't get a job at NASA. They didn't need me, but I could join this organization and feel like it was a part of this great adventure that I was hoping would come back any day now, and now it's here.
Well said. The phone lines are lighting up, Rod Pyle, just like kicking the tires, lighting the fires, as they say in the Air Force and the military world of aviation. Let's say good morning to Brian in Bayside. You're on with author Rod Pyle. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, guys. My thing is, I would love to travel in space, but unless we're going to travel a lot faster than we know how to now, where are we going? I mean, great, we can get to Mars, we can, get to neighboring planets, the moon. But where do we go from here?
Very good question. Stay with us, Brian, because Rod, I'm sure, has a plethora of information on that good concern and question.
Well, I certainly have
travel faster.
Yeah, so I think for foreseeable future, you're right. We're talking about the Earth orbit, we're talking about the moon, we're talking about Mars, and there's a lot of work to do there. And more importantly, in the current new space age, especially the United States, there's a lot of money to be made out there. So between stuff we can do on the moon, asteroid prospecting, all this kind of stuff, a lot of it is still somewhat theoretical. But these major accounting firms have predicted that by 2030, we'll be looking at a $1 trillion economy out there. So there is a business to it. There's also things that you can do in orbit, like power generation, space solar power platforms that beam power down to the surface of the planet 24 hours a day. Once they're amortized out, it's virtually free. Now, I'm sure somebody will find a way to charge money for it, because that's how capitalism works. But they don't pollute at all. There is absolutely no carbon footprint. So that alone. And then on my podcast called This Week in Space, we just did an interview with a woman who works at NASA Ames on the space station. And we were talking about being able to grow artificial retinas in zero G in the space station or future space station.
That's powerful.
Artificial heart tissue. And they're moving fast on potential cancer cures, therapies for Alzheimer's, and these are things that are going to bankrupt this country if we're not going to be able to get our heads wrapped around it in the next decade or two because of the increasing cost of entitlement. So, when you start looking at it from that angle, there's a lot of benefits that come back. As far as you and me and the rest of us traveling out there, that's going to take a while, but eventually that'll happen. It may be tourism. It may be retirement on Mars. I don't know.
Well, that's a good one, Rob.
There are reasons to go to either of these places.
Yeah, let me jump in here. Brian in Bayside. Here's an article from World Nuclear News. This came out earlier in February of this year. The headline is Mars in 30 Days, Russia Unveils Prototype of Plasma Rocket Engine. And it goes on, and I'm reading this. It describes a plasma rocket motor has a type of electric motor based on two electrodes. Charged particles are passed between them, and blah, blah, blah. At the same time, a high voltage is applied, and this, of course, creates a magnetic field. Brian, that could be another answer that Rod is adding to the conversation. Wouldn't that be amazing, Brian, in Bayside? How about that?
And we know that former astronaut Franklin Chang Diaz has been working on his plasma engine for decades, and they're making slow progress. And then there's also nuclear propulsion, which isn't that fast. But, we know it works. We tested this technology in the 60s on the ground. We know it works. It's just a question of having the political willpower to launch it. And then you're getting to Mars in a couple of months.
No, you're 100% right. People look up the NERVA project. I think it's NERVA, if I'm correct, Rod, that apparently even President Kennedy, when he was alive, obviously in his last year or two, he, of course, went out to the area which we call somewhere like an Area 51, and they demonstrated a prototype of a nuclear rocket, which was simply something that we took for granted, because if we could give little kids in their cereals these little things that were like radioactive toys, why couldn't we build, on a safe side, a nuclear rocket, which is interesting. Folks, 1-800-848-9222. Joining us in the conversation is Rod Pyle. He's the author of many books. Plus 20 is the number he's telling us. A very interesting gentleman. I call him a friend, and we certainly appreciate his time here. Rod, we go to the hard break in about 5 minutes, but I wanted to bring up and kind of tease this particular story. China and its involvement of going to the moon. This is a very interesting thing that I thought was quite fascinating, that apparently I don't see the energy like a space race to the days of President Kennedy's goal, but obviously we're still in the road of seeing China possibly, and save all the good information after we come back, but this is kind of interesting. What's going on?
Well, they're really following in the footsteps of Apollo. It's very much a land and grab mission. Get there, land on the surface, grab some samples, and then leave within 6 hours. So this first one that they're talking about for 2030, I think it's going to be earlier, will be a fast get there, prove you can do it, and come home. Nothing compared to what we've got planned, but they're moving fast. They move steadily. They have budgets allocated out for a decade at a time, and they're going to do it. It's just a question of whether we're able to get our act together as we claim for a landing of Americans in 2027, or if it continues to slip. And at this point, it looks like we may very well lose this race this time.
Look, I don't want to knock NASA, but it's just like I'm a human just like everybody else, and they have an opinion. And because you're behind a microphone, it's heard by a lot of people. But here we go. What a shame to be able to have a disjointed NASA program, and not necessarily to be this warrior of space that we always have to be the lead, which I think we could, based on all the things we've done in the past. And it's kind of sad, Rod Pyle, that, all these disjointed programs. You had a Constellation program to the moon. Different presidents said, we'll go to Mars. And even President Nixon was looking to see us go there during that period where they could have changed. Instead of doing shuttle, they could have done a Mars mission, right? So it's unfortunate that NASA doesn't seem to have that focal point anymore. And look at all these other countries that are doing it.
The problem is it isn't NASA, it's the government. It's switching administrations. One comes in, cancels what the last one wanted to do. And the funding is so inconsistent, and Congress is, except for this time around, where Congress may give them more than Trump is asking for, more often Congress has given them less than the president had asked for. So, our political system, as wonderful as it is, this moon program is a victim of the way we make these decisions and carry out funding.
No, let me be clear here. Again, you're right. It's not NASA that's doing the disjointed. It's obviously if you can't do things unless you have money. And you could dream all you want and sit under a tree and let an apple hit you on the head, like the allegory of Newton when he talked about gravity, right? In a comical way. But the truth of the matter is, there has to be a passion. And you got to give credit to President Kennedy back then at that speech at Rice University, when we all know what he said. And he said in summation, we're going to do this before the decade is out, land a man on the moon and return him safely to the earth. And that particular thing happened. And Rod Pyle, coming across the wire right now, is an interesting story about this interstellar comet, I should say, known as C-2025N1. What the heck is this? It's the third so-called interstellar comet, meaning it didn't come from an orbit around the sun. It came probably from another star system, discovered back in July of this year at the Atlas Observatory in Chile, some of the clearest skies. It's now 242 million miles away in the constellation of Libra, the Balances, and it'll be closest to the Earth, very safe distance of 170 million miles on October the 29th. But many people, ladies and gentlemen, because of its hyperbolic orbit, are saying it's faster than any object that's zooming through the solar system. And one very dedicated and intellect Harvard astronomer even says that it could be, in his words, an interstellar craft. The rest of the Sky Report goes like this. If you get up early in the morning, and many of you are experiencing that in just a few hours, if you look into the northeast sky just before sunrise, you'll get to see the two planets, easy to see with the naked eye, both Venus and Jupiter. And the end of this particular meteor season, called the Perseids, the dark of the moon, ladies and gentlemen, is a great time to see the beauty of the nighttime sky. Rod Pyle, how'd I do?
You did great, and I have a quick correction to make, if I could.
Go ahead.
Which is, I was saying the two organizations that formed the National Space Society, the L5 Society, of course, was started around the work of Gerard K. O'Neill. If I didn't put that in there, I'd get hate mail tomorrow. I had a little electronic hiccup here, and I was busy, so I missed it. But Gerard K. O'Neill, ladies and gentlemen, our guy, yeah.
And 1-800-848-9222 as we continue to move through the dark of the night into the early morning hours for many of you, and still late evening on the West Coast. Rod, talk more about this, because this particular spacecraft that the Chinese are attempting to utilize, I guess, has been manufactured. Do I describe it as the Lanyu? Or is that correct pronunciation? I'm not fluent in Mandarin.
So the capsule, which is like a slightly larger Apollo capsule, is called Mengzhou, which translates as dream vessel. And it carries more than the Apollo was capable of. It can carry up to 7, like the Crew Dragon out of SpaceX, but it's going to carry fewer than that to the moon. The lander, which is called Lanyu, which translates as embracing the moon, is similar to the lunar module, but as you and I talked earlier, it's a slightly different configuration. So the main difference in this program is their booster, called the Long March 10, isn't nearly the size or heft of the Saturn V, so they've got to launch it twice, once to put the lander in lunar orbit, and then once to send a crew up. Then they rendezvous, and the Apollo program considered this. They felt it was too risky back then. It's not too risky. It'll probably work. Rendezvous in lunar orbit, then the taikonauts that are going to go down to the lunar surface, which is the name of a Chinese astronaut, transfer over to their lunar lander, and it heads down. And as you pointed out, they've got a landing stage which goes about halfway down, and then they jettison that and land on the final configuration with the landing legs down. And then when they're done with what's said to be a 6-hour lunar exploration for this first mission, the whole thing comes up. It's not like the lunar module where it lifts off in the lower stage. Wow. Why they designed that way, I don't know. But, you know, the thing about this is, and no sour grapes intended here, but anybody, whether it's private industry like SpaceX and Blue Origin, or the Chinese, the heavy lifting was really done by the United States and the Soviet Union back in the 60s. That was all the first time for all this stuff. Now we know pretty well how it works. We've got those designs. We have a good idea of how these high-pressure turbines work and so forth. And so although they're operating with sometimes different fuels and different configurations, you know, the legacy of what particularly NASA achieved in that era just can't be overstated.
No, it's amazing what you're talking about. So again, let's go back in time, ladies and gentlemen. The Apollo days. When Apollo 11 went to the surface of the moon, think about that, folks. This is amazing. It just had the lunar module, the descent module, all right, Rod, going down on its own power, its own navigation. And we had Don Iles here. I don't know if you heard the interview. It can be, found, everybody, in the individual archives for the Dr. Sky Experience here at WABCRadio.com. Who was Rod, who is this gentleman that we're talking about here, Don Iles? He describes himself as a hippie of the 60s, working at MIT, developing a landing software for this particular spacecraft. And that, to me, is amazing. He flew simulations with the actual astronauts that went there. So look at this. The Chinese are using this big lower booster to get it down, and then they boost, they get rid of that, and then they land. So the point I'm trying to make in simple words, how amazing the whole Apollo landing thing was done a long time ago. Incredible.
It really is, and that whole program. So speaking just of that computer, at the time they started working on that at MIT in the early 1960s, computers filled rooms. They were huge. They were heavy. They were energy hungry. And now we have to have something brought down the size of a briefcase with that technology to get us to the moon. I mean, transistors were still new. You and I had what were probably then very expensive transistor radios. That was a big deal. So here's this computer that's got about the computing strength of the electronic module on your toaster oven at home. I mean, it's just the further I get from it, and I was talking to some of these Apollo guys about that, and we agreed, the further we get from it, the more amazing it is that it worked. They didn't lose anybody, because this is really rapidly evolved 1950s aerospace technology put into the 60s, and they carried it off without a hitch. They had a couple of near misses, but other than Apollo 1, it all went very well.
Well, let's welcome Paulie in Westwood to our family, the Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning, Paulie. You're on with Rod Pyle. How are you this morning?
Good, Dr. Sky. How are you? I'd like to know something. I heard that the moon is actually moving farther away from the Earth, like an inch a year, and do they have to calculate that in if they go to the moon?
It slowly is. I don't know if it's inches or centimeters, but either way, you're 100% right, Paulie, and that's an amazing thing. Over time, and we're talking a mega amount of time, that would probably be a really big consideration. But, Rod, what do you say on that? I mean, it's an interesting concept. If you're moving the moon away, we have to change our calculations like you had some sort of a GPS system to lock onto the moon.
Well, the guys that work at these places, most of my time was spent at JPL, a little bit at Johnson Space Center. They're frighteningly smart. And if you're able to send a spacecraft out to rendezvous with Pluto at the end of a decade-long cruise mode within a matter of a few miles or less, I think the moon's probably a pretty easy target, because you can see where you're going, right? Exactly. I'm just kidding there, but
no, I get it.
That's all calculated in, of course.
Right. No, it's amazing. Paulie, does that answer your concern in any way, shape, or form? I hope it does.
Yeah, I was wondering, because something popped up on my phone that the moon was moving, and I was just wondering if it was true.
It is. It's slowly receding from us, and that's great, because, Paulie, I got to give you credit. A lot of people have no idea about that, or they would think like many people I know that think we never went to the moon. Paulie in Westwood, appreciate your time on the Dr. Sky Experience. We appreciate you greatly. Let's say good morning to Tony in Clifton. Good morning, Tony. How are you this morning? Good to have you on board.
Hi, Dr. Sky. Hi, Rod. I know you guys are busy, so I'll make it quick. I'm very concerned about the NASA program. I would say for all the listeners who are interested to please call the White House number. The president does review those requests, and let him know at the White House through that number that you are very interested in seeing the program continue. Number two, I just wanted to say that there are just a few of the Apollo astronauts alive, and I had mentioned this to Dr. Sky before, Harrison Schmitt, and they're all in their 90s. Harrison Schmitt, of course, I'm not sure if any of them are still active. I think Harrison was seen somewhere at some event in 24. I saw him online. I know he was actually at the White House in President Trump's first term when they put the lunar rock there. And so I'd like to know, Dr. Sky, if he is still available, if the legacy of his is amazing, if he's interested in chatting with you.
Rod, I think that's an awesome question that she's asking about. Please continue.
Yeah, so we still have Fred Hayes from Apollo 13, who's somewhat active, and Charlie Duke from Apollo 16, who's extremely active. He's constantly out there traveling. He was the youngest of the moonwalkers at the time he was on the moon, and he is all over the place. And if you remember anything about the Apollo 16 mission, Charlie was hilarious because he was so enthusiastic, and his voice way up like this, and hot dog, John, isn't this great? And John Young was, this kind of hickory stick sort of guy. Charlie, calm down. So they're driving the lunar rover across the moon, and it's pretty close quarters in that thing. It was really tiny. So Charlie would be gesturing, John, look at that rock over there. We got to go look at that. It's like, oh, darn it, Charlie, stop hitting my arm. I can't steer. So Charlie's
good old Texas boy. There you go. That's it.
I did want to reiterate a point that Tony brought up, though, that's really excellent, which is Also, write your representatives, because they've got a voice, and write Ted Cruz's office, because as of right now in Congress, he's overseeing this stuff, and he needs to know that people think it's a priority. So add that to your list of letters.
Tony, you get the last word. Thanks for staying with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is exciting. I think their legacy is amazing. So what I was asking, though, is do we know of any of them who are still on the circuit at 90, like talking and doing things? Who's the most active, would you say?
Charlie Duke.
Yeah, I met him once. He's awesome. Yeah,
he is incredible. He's also he's an astronaut come lay pastor, interestingly, and also Jerry Griffin, who was one of the flight directors, is also traveling almost weekly. It's amazing. Right now, he's a little busy because he's coordinating the flood recovery efforts in the Texas Hill Country. At the age of 90, they put him in charge because he's that good.
I know.
But
I know.
Generally, he's all over the place, yeah. So there's a
Tony,
handful of them that are still out
we
there.
appreciate you, and you're calling in from Clifton, New Jersey. I used to go along Route 46 to the famous Rutt's Hut. Is it still around? I'm just curious.
It's still there. I don't like participate.
Okay. I had to ask because
I'm a hamburger. I'm a hamburger girl.
Well, Tony, I appreciate you on our show. And I always appreciate your, concise and very impacting concerns, questions, and dialogue. So thank you. Hope you have a good weekend. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Let's say good morning to Pamela in New Jersey. She's been patiently waiting. Good morning, Pamela. You're on with Rod Pyle.
Good morning. And I'm just to give a counterpoint. I'm a capitalist, and I was one of those kids watching the moonwalk and But some of us have grown cynical, concerning funding because, like Atlantic City was going to bring our taxes down in New Jersey. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And, a lot of these moon things, it's going to invent things for science, and I'm sure it has. But, and I'm sure we see it in some form somewhere down the line. But as we know, medical things and energy has gone skyrocketed through the roof, and our everyday life is not, I don't know, you could argue it's better, but a lot of us are hurting out here. So for a conservative, for somebody, to say that, I'm seeing the other side. So just, in reference to funding, remember, I was one of those kids in the 60s saying, oh boy, this is going to make our life easier. And it seems like life is getting harder.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that perspective, but you have every right to have a response from Rod. Rod, that's a very interesting concern that Pamela has. Please address it.
Well, it is. And in broader terms, it sort of falls into the argument of, fill the potholes on Main Street before you start paving the way to the moon. And I can only say, as I said earlier, the returns we ended up getting from Apollo just fiscally were 16 to 24 over every dollar that was spent. But in terms of education and innovation and so forth, the returns were huge. And I hear you about how life is now. It's a very tough time. But if we let China pull too far ahead of us, we're going to be in a much worse way than we are now. And they are already at about parity with us in orbital activity, and probably going to be with parity with us in lunar activity pretty soon. And, some of that's geopolitical. It's a big, complicated, thorny issue. And I do hear you because it doesn't feel like it's going to help us in the short term. I personally would like to take a small percentage away from the F-35 budget of $1 trillion plus over its deployment lifetime and put that into this tiny NASA budget, which even at its height right now, back in the Apollo era, when we remember those landings, it was almost 5% of the federal budget. Today, all this is going on, including all the outer solar system stuff, the space station, everything else, for 0.5% of the federal budget, soon probably less. So when you look at that compared to defense and everything else, the Space Force budget is half again as big as NASA's, and I don't know what they're doing with it, but I think,
you're right.
I think
you're right,
can afford.
It's interesting. But Pamela, before we let you go here, and we say that respectfully, this is interesting. I'm with you on many of these things here. We had our previous guest in hour number one, Mr. McKibben, writing a book about solar power. And like myself, I'm a capitalist and proud to say it. And I'm an open-minded person who tries to be common sense. But wouldn't it be great if we could have the manufacturing of these solar panels, bring it back to America, and keep what we consider America first, not with a bad attitude about it. But Pamela, you get the last word on that. I mean, have we at least responded that gives some sort of hope?
No, I agree with that. And there's toxic material in solar panels. And,
yes.
you think, those of us who have been on this planet a while, we know to ask questions, Vietnam, et cetera. And,
you bet.
Oh, yeah.
So, for the last, how many months, or up to almost a year now, we were terrorized in New Jersey by these drones. And
yes.
everybody giving us, we don't know what they are. Come on, get real. There's a difference between secrets of state and give us a word why these big, huge robots are hovering above our house. And
boy, Pamela, I like you a lot. I mean, you're 100% right. You're like an activist in my corner because, no, you're absolutely right. Still, Rod knows this also. We've never been given an answer to the people in the New York metro area who saw these SUV-sized objects, and I'm being a little bit on the conservative side. We never heard what it was, but when one answer was given to us in the new administration is that, don't worry about it, it's a research project, or we really don't have much more to say. Pamela, that story continues, but more important, I hope we've at least given some positivity to the concerns that you break and bring to the table. So thank you for joining us. Hope you'll be part of this.
I appreciate the ability to state that side. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Rod, we need this done in record time because we're almost out of time, and that's the way it works.
Okay.
The clock rules. How do people get in touch with you? Because we've asked this before of you, and hopefully you're getting some responses, but how do people get in touch with you?
They go to my website, pylebooks.com. That's Pyle books.com. And I can also be contacted through the National Space Society at nss.org. And while you're there, maybe you'll want to join.
There you go.
So let them know I sent you.
That's a clarion call for common sense, because if you don't, and again, you're under no obligation, ladies and gentlemen, it should be right from the heart and wanting to do something, because you're right. You illustrated in this 1 hour, as you always do, positively and very, very eloquently, that the NASA budget is an extremely small portion of so many of the other things going on there. And not to knock Sean Duffy, the transportation secretary, say it once again. The mission now is to take away from what kind of science that I think you mentioned? What are they doing?
Well, they want to cut the NASA science budget by just under half if the White House gets its way. But in particular, this recent move was to kill climate science and anything looking back at Earth, which includes, some part of weather forecasting and monitoring other parts of the environment. It's not just for environmentalists. It's for farmers. It's for ships at sea. All this stuff could be affected. So it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And a little startling revelation as we wrap up our show, Rod, maybe not to comment on, but just to mention to the audience here on Talk Radio 77 WABC, Chinese scientists and others around the world are now finding a correlation between high sunspot numbers and the change of the solar cycle to increases in blood pressure in you and I. Isn't that a most amazing subject at all? That even still, ladies and gentlemen, there really is a correlation between what's going on in the heavens, and of course it manifests itself all the way down to our own bodies. The mysteries of the universe continue. Rod, is that right, Rod Pyle? Amazing.
That's fascinating. I had no idea.
Yes.
Well, good. I have an excuse to tell my doctor as to why my blood pressure is always so high. It's not my fault. It's the sun.
But we have to find out, is it higher during solar max or is it lower? But no, what they're saying is, obviously, they have to do more research, but that's fine. And it's very interesting because it's saying that it's affecting the harmony of the frequency of the Earth, like 7.8 hertz, that these solar storms affect the natural frequency of the Earth, which then could be induced into humans. But again, I'm not a medical doctor here on this particular radio show, and we'll get experts in that field to talk about what that story is. Rod Pyle, always a pleasure.